So in this video, we are looking at a problem statement to fetch data from database. So clients cannot directly reach to the database. So what we need to write is a service which shall be sitting on some of the server and would be responsible for fetching the data from the database. And what we are trying to do here is this service which I have drawn here, this shall be using Spring Boot. So let's quickly see how this can be done. At a high level, Spring Boot architecture looks like this. You have a client. The client can be any application which is accessing the RESTful service. So it can be a single page application, Postman, some web app, or some other applications. It would be reaching the controller. This is the entire service part. This is the service part. And the first point of interaction is the controller. The business part is written inside a service class, and then we have a repository. And repository is an abstraction that provides a set of methods for performing common database operations. So this shall be providing some abstraction to perform common database operations, which we are going to see, and it shall be interacting with the database. And domain entity is basically a representation of a table in the database. So I have not included any API-C, API gateways, and all those things for the simplicity. Uh, yeah. So what are the things which shall be required for making this application? They are listed here succinctly. As we go ahead, we would be seeing all these details. Let's go through them quickly. You need a database, so you have to establish a connection with the DB. In this exercise, we are going to use H2, an in-memory database called H2. We'll see how to include it in Spring Boot. We'll be creating domain entities, which would be the representation of the tables which are there inside the database. We shall be creating a repository. And like we discussed earlier, repository is meant to abstract the connections to the database. And then we shall be having a service layer. Service layer is responsible for the business logic and it interacts with the repository. We should ideally controller should not directly be accessing repository. All the business logic and all the accessing of the repository should be done from a service layer. And finally, we shall have the controller, and controller is what would be giving us all the RESTful endpoints. So these are the 5 steps which are required to perform this exercise. So let's go to the first step, where what we do is we get a basic scaffolding of a Spring Boot application. Let me go to the Spring initializer to get the scaffolding. So for getting the scaffolding, what we have to do, we have to go to this site, start.spring.io. I would be going with Java as a language, and I'll be choosing Maven. And then I would like to name this, let's say com.jfree, and let's say artifact is data service. Okay. And then I have to add the dependencies which are required for this application. So we said H2 is one dependency. So as you can see here, H2 provides a fast in-memory database that supports JDBC API and R2 DBC access. So H2 I have added. Spring Data I'll add. So when you read about Spring Data, persist data in SQL stores with Java persistent JPA using Spring Data and Hibernate. The last is Spring Boot Starter Web. So this would give me all the annotations which are required for this application. I can do explore. If I go here, I would be able to go to the POM file. I see the Spring Boot Starter Web is there, the JPA is there, and the H2 database is also there. With all these things in place, let me download. And after downloading, I'll be extracting it to my folder and opening it in my IntelliJ application which I had downloaded. And now let me execute the same. I see the dependencies are already downloaded. I'll create a configuration for running this application. So let me call it data service. Okay, so now we have the base thing in place. Now what we have to do, the first thing which we discussed was creating the connection with the database. So let me do that. So what I'll do is I will go to the resources, and in the properties file, I'll copy the URL, the username, password, and the DDL logic, which is create and drop. So creation on the start, the database creation on the start of the application, and drop on the closure of the application. That's what has been done. The last one is H2 console enabled. I'll show you why this is required. It is required to see the state of the database on a web browser. We will see this in a bit. Now let's create an entity. What I'll do here is I'll create an entity now. So I'm going to create a new package, and I'll create a new entity with the name, let's say customer. Okay, I'll cancel this. I don't want to add it to Git. And I'm going to copy the code from somewhere, and I'll explain you what is happening there. So we can see that this is the entity, which means it's a representation of a table in database. So this table shall be created in the H2 database. Ideally, it should have been already present, but it shall be creating it in the in-memory database. We shall see when we start this application. It has 3 columns, one ID, it is auto-generated value, first name, last name. Then we have some constructors here, and then we have some getters and setters. And if you want to convert it into toString, so this is how the toString, I want to see the ID, first name and last name. That's what has been written here. So very basic class. Then we were mentioning that we should be having a repository. And repository is what? Repository is the abstraction which shall fetch the data from the database. So let me create a new folder or a package called repository. And let me name this class as customer repo. I shall inform you what exactly I'm trying to do here. I'll delete this because I copied it from some place. There is a problem. I will include this dependency, and these two, basically all the create, update, retrieve, delete functions are already available. And I'm adding 2 more custom functions, find by last name and find by ID. We shall see how it works in a bit. But for now, you know that you have to extend from JPA repository. You have to give the name of the entity, and you have to give the primary key, the ID. ID is what type? It's a long. So that's what we have to give here. It's a long here. So repository is there. Now we discussed that the controller shall speak to the service to fetch the data, and service shall be having uh, some kind of business logic to do things. So let's create a service now, and I call it a customer service. And I will include all the dependencies which are missing here. Okay, so what is happening here is in the customer repo, we are we are in the service, we are calling if get all customers, we are calling customer repo and getting all the list of customers which are present. Customer ID, same thing, we are finding by ID and returning the customer ID. So that's what has been achieved now. Now let's see this one. Now this is the service which we want to use it in a controller. So now what is the last piece which is missing? The last piece missing is the controller. So let me create a customer controller. So let me have a package called controllers. So customer controller is in place now. And what I'll do is I'll copy and paste the code and I'll explain you what exactly is there in the customer controller. So customer controller looks like this, and all the missing things I would be adding them. So we have a get mapping, a post mapping, and a delete mapping. So get mapping, there is a get all customers, get customer by a ID, post a new customer, and delete a customer by ID. These are the things which are there. Now let's run the application. So we can see that this is running on port 8080. Now if I go to our Chrome, if I navigate to this place, this is where I should be able to see the H2 database. And what I have to do is the JDBC URL. This should be same as in the properties file. If you do the test connection, it shall be succeeding. If you see here, you shall be able to see that there is a customers table which has been created. But if you run, there is nothing which is in place. Okay, how can we put some data in place before we run the application? That I'll show you in a bit. But for now, let me insert some data with the help of Postman. So I have this open, and what I'm doing here now is with the help of curl or curl, I am trying to post some data. So the data has been posted, and the same you can do with the Postman as well. So this data has been posted, and if we go and see it here now, we shall be able to see that there is a data which has been posted. If I run the same thing again, probably with some other ID, let's say, no, not like this. I can't do like this. So let me modify in my notepad and put it here. I'll clear it. I'll again post the data, and the data has been posted here. And if I see here, if I run this again, I shall be able to see the second entry also being made. So that's so what is happening here. If we go to our controller, we shall be able to see that this is what is being invoked. And this is invoking what? It is invoking your customer service. And in the customer service, what you are doing? You are doing the data save. So let's see from the beginning once more. So we have the controller, we have the post mapping, we are doing a save customer, and in the save customer, we are calling the save on the customer repo. So this has been, and the data is being saved because of this. And the default representation of uh, I mean the package representation of the crude repository from which we have downloaded the from which we have inherited the repository is represented here. So we have what we have done, we have extended from this JPA repository. Okay, so that's what we were able to see earlier. So these are some of the methods which are by default available in the JPA repository. Okay, so now if I have to have these elements added by default, let's say that I want to have these elements added, some of the elements, if I restart the application again, the database will clear because it will clear because of this property which we had discussed earlier. create drop. So if I go to the and moreover it's a in-memory database. So in-memory database meaning everything shall be deleted. If I run it now, I connect it again, connection was also lost because the database got deleted. If I go here, I run it, nothing. So now if in case I have to pre-populate some data in the database, then what I can do is I can utilize something called as a command line runner. And what is a command line runner? So command line runner runs after the creation of the context, application context, and thereby it is very, very helpful in pre-populating the data. So let me see what problems are coming here now. So I'm going to add the references. Okay, so log. So log is SLF4J. So for that, what we have to do is we have to include some dependencies, which I shall do now. And what else? Apart from that, I have to create a application context. So let me do that. Okay, so this is what is required. And now what I have to do is I have to also create this log. So for creating the log, let me do this. And this is basically the name should be proper. So I will just correct the name. So now if I run this application, let me restart this application. What shall happen is that we shall be able to see the data already present, whatever data, which four data records which I have put here should already be present in the database when the application is. So yes, we know the connection would reset. We run the, we select the query and we run it. And we see that the data has been created. So let me refresh this application one more time. That what exactly we achieved in the application. So we created a DB connection. It was, you have seen the database being imported in the POM file, the dependency being included there, and the application properties file, which were included to have the database connection set up. We created a domain entity, which is basically the representation, the object OOPS representation of the table that we had created. We created a repository. We used the JPA repository, and all the CRUD operations came automatically by default from the framework. We created a service layer to fetch the data. If there is any business logic which we have to put, we have to put it there. So for example, let's say some customers we have to not return because they have been blacklisted. So that kind of logic we can put in the service layer. And we created a controller, and the controller, what it did, it was fetching the records for us. We did a post, we did a get. Yeah, I think we did not do a get, but I can quickly show you how you can do a get also. And yeah, so this is what we, when there is an interaction, the first point is the controller will call the service will call the repository, and repository is going to fetch the data for us, and this is very, very abstracted from us. So so I would quickly do a get now because that is what was missing. So we can see that all the records, ID1 Shahrukh, ID2 Ben Kingsley, ID3, whatever is inserted in the database is presented to us. So all these four things are presented to us. And similarly, we can run the delete and fetch by ID and all those things, which you can easily run. So I don't need to demonstrate it. So this is all about data services and how we can easily create them in Spring Boot. I would upload this application to GitHub. Uh, Thank you very much.